in the ordinance.
6. You have 5.
5.
Or I'm 6.
We need 6 though, because we have an empty seat on it.
9 normally.
Where's our lawyer?
Who's our lawyer? It's good enough, isn't it?
So the Appropriations Committee and the Common Council meeting, we can do a voting member.
Sure, we should be good.
You count towards a quorum.
I do. We got
Okay.
6 of 9 spots present, so that would be a quorum. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God,
Under God.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first up is a budget overview. I assume we're going to go with the staff presentation led by Administrator Jones, supported as needed.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, members of the Appropriations Committee, staff, city staff, and other gathered residents and stakeholders. Tonight is the Appropriations Committee for October 6th, and the work that you'll review tonight that's before you is the culmination of more than 3 months or 90 days worth of work, rather swift work, frankly, on the part of city staff and others involved in the annual budgeting process as we work to pull together for your consideration and approval tonight our proposed spending plan for 2023. And if we take a look back to the beginning of the year when we gathered as a committee of the whole in February to engage in a strategic planning process, many of the components of the spending plan for 2023 revolve around the various focus areas that have been identified in the strategic plan that was approved back in July. In particular, some of the major themes associated with next year's spending plan revolve around public safety, with the establishment of the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department, as well as dispatch services moving to the county starting January 1st. In terms of financial stewardship, we've been able to hold the tax rate at a commensurate level pursuant to the council's direction at our budget workshop meeting in August, and we've been able to absorb several inflationary pressures related to personnel costs in the areas of wages, benefits, and retirement expenses without a commensurate increase in the tax rate. Lastly, our capital plan is on par with what was approved for this year, so we're holding the line on that spending level of approximately $1.3 million, but there's also been added in another $1.8 million in ARPA funding that's within the capital plan proposed for adoption here this year. And if you look across these 3 large areas here, those investments in public safety, in the organization and the employees, as well as our capital, are the pistons that drive customer service and ultimately improve the quality of life here for residents and businesses in Mequon. And so as we walk through some slides here to kick off tonight's deliberations, please keep in mind these areas, which will be the focus of discussion and consideration. Looking at the revenue side of the equation, and revenues equal expenditures, just a quick reminder that the state of Wisconsin restricts increases to the tax levy equivalent to the amount of net new construction. And as was discussed at the budget workshop in August, net new construction is up 2.2% or $360,000. So that was some revenue that staff had to at their disposal in order to prepare the spending plan before you tonight. Additionally, and this is something that the council needs to consider not only tonight but longer term, there is excess levy capacity above the allowable limit that the city has retained over time, equivalent to almost $700,000. As part of this year's proposed spending plan, there are no fee adjustments recommended for 2023. We are adding $200,000 in ARPA funds, as we did to the budget for 2022, and fire and EMS fees are down by nearly 80% as we move that line item, or that budget rather, over to the Southern Ozaki Fire Department. The proposed levy for communications emergency dispatch is currently under review by the Department of Revenue. Staff has conservatively estimated an amount equivalent to staffing the window and the front counter in the public safety building with 3.5 employees. And so the number that you see in the budget is considerably less than what it would take previously to staff a full-time communications dispatch center. So if we look at the revenues across the major categories within the general fund, you can see there's a market decrease relative to a number of the revenue sources. In particular, state revenue is declining, and that's due to fire insurance funds going to the Southern Ozaki Fire Department, as well as public safety fees, the 80% increase that I talked about. Other revenues are also declining because there is no programmed use of fund balance within the budget this year or for next year, and we had a pilot agreement expire, and that was a loss of about $70,000 of revenue. All told, the budget is down about $1.1 million year over year, equivalent to a reduction of about 6%. On the expenditure side, the public safety consolidations that I've referenced are resulting in reductions across all of the spending categories. There's a slight increase for the library, equivalent to $4,000 within the proposed budget, and the Southern Ozaki Fire Department will now be supported through the tax levy by a grant similar to the way we budget for the library on a year-over-year basis. There is no new spending in the budget proposed for 2023 beyond the personnel costs that we needed to absorb on wages, benefits, and retirement, and many of the inflationary increases outlined in Exhibits B, C, and D within the budget document have not been incorporated into the spending plan due to the fact that the council directed staff to prepare a budget with no upward pressure on the tax rate. So that is something that may get discussed a little later on this evening, but we were not able to absorb many of the inflationary increases identified by staff. And here's just a chart that kind of summarizes the general fund expenditures across the major categories. You see salaries, benefits, materials, facilities, plant, purchase services, all as a result of the two public safety consolidations are reduced. The library is seeing a $4,000 increase in their allocation. And as I mentioned, we've now created a separate line item for the fire and EMS department with Thiensville, equivalent to $1.3 million. As the budget team was working through mid-September and preparing the budget to be shipped out to the council for its consideration, there were some reductions that needed to be applied to the budget in order to balance expenditures with revenues. And this list is a summary of what was included in the budget materials, but it outlines some of the operating reductions that were applied to the budget in order to achieve balance. As you can see on this chart, many of these expenses relate to overtime, they relate to seasonal positions, and they relate to anticipated savings that we will likely see on the personnel side, as well as some smaller dollar amounts related to supplies and other spending. In a normal year, staff would not be recommending that any of these items be removed from the budget. These items have typically carried forth on a year-over-year basis within the city's annual operating budget, but these changes or these reductions were necessary in order to bring the budget into balance. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Bialk right now, who's going to provide a quick overview of the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department budget, which was approved by the Board of Directors at their meeting on September 21st. And he has just a couple of slides which will summarize some of the notable deliverables within the budget, as well as some of the numbers that are involved. Chief?
Thanks. The whole budget is predicated on obviously our two communities combining budgets, plus the increase in ambulance revenues or ambulance fees we agreed on last month that were approved, and Thiensville did the same. The budget is heavily reliant on those revenues, so the ambulance fee market adjustment, raising the rates to more what the market to bear, is going to bring us quite a bit more money last year, or this year, next year, close to $300,000, I believe. There's some changes to the alarm and sprinkler and inspection fees that we're going to charge next year. There's $300,000 that came in from the county's ARPA grant to hire more paramedics in Ozaki County. That money will get us 4 additional full-time firefighter paramedics next year. 3 in the beginning of the year and 1 halfway through. We were able to maintain the capital contributions with both communities, about $140,000, and we even created a reserve or a contingency of about 5% in the budget. If you take a look at this, the far right column is the total for the new Seoul Fire Department. And the other columns are what Mequon spent in 22, Thiensville spent in 22, and then combined. The Mequon levy goes up,
About $33,000.
$35,000. Thiensville's increases up $40,000. The capital contribution kept the same for the two communities. The intergovernmental money is the 2% dues that the fire departments receive for doing fire inspections. The regulatory compliance line item is our FAP money we get from the state of Wisconsin. Is kind of a incentive for EMS and medical transports. Charge for services, that's where the ambulance transports come in. And all that totaled up to there is the $3.5 million budget.
So you see a couple of kickers here. I can't get my clicker to work. You see a couple of kickers with Thiensville raising their levy by almost $40,000. The intergovernmental revenue reflects the Ozaki County ARPA funds, and then the charges for services, the chief noted, are the ambulance fees and the other charges for service related to alarm and sprinkler inspections.
The wages, obviously, wage and salary is up because we're adding the additional people, mostly because of the funding for the ARPA fund, because currently we have a chief, a full-time chief, deputy chief, the 3 battalion chiefs, and 4 full-time firefighter paramedics. January 1, we'll gain the 2 full-time employees that Thiensville has, plus the additional person we want to hire, and then 1 more person halfway through the year. The rest of it is, you can see we kind of combined what we were spending on services and commodities, equipment. Alderperson Schneider brought up a question about, at one of the meetings, about the reductions. Currently we have, Mequon has 9, I call them heavy pieces of equipment. Thiensville has 3. After we combine by the end of 23, when we get through this, we'll still have 9. We're going to get rid of 3 of the heavy pieces of equipment. That would be a ladder truck and 2 fire engines. In today's dollars, that's well over $2 million. It's probably almost close to $3 million for that equipment. When we have to service or test our pumps every year. Somebody comes in, it's almost $1,500 to test the pumps. Well, there'd be 3 less fire truck pumps that we have to test next year. They have to certify our ground ladders and our aerial ladder, and they charge by the foot. So a ladder truck has 172 feet of ground ladders on it. We're saving $3 a foot on that, plus the aerial doesn't have to get the certification testing. Equipment maintenance, that's still going to be worked out next year as we combine the fleets. We still have to figure out how we're going to work out the maintenance agreement between the communities. The insurance, the city gets a reduction because you're not paying for the liability for the firefighters anymore, but So Fire has to pick up that. The same with our workers' comp. There was we're still working with them. Mequon's modifier, and it gives them a better rate on workers' comp. Since we're a new entity, we have to start with a higher modifier at 1, so our costs are a little more. Hopefully, we're working with them to try to show the exposure we've had in the past to bring that modifier down. To get a better deal on that, we're still working on that as we speak. Okay. Any questions on the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department budget? This was approved unanimously by the board on the 21st. As members of the committee will recall, Alderman Parrish, Alderwoman Schneider, and Mayor Nurbin are the city's 3 representatives on that board. So this group, this body is well represented on that fledgling board as we move through the first year of establishing the department and kicking off operations.
I'd just like to add that the chief and staff from both communities have done an excellent job putting it together, but as the chief just noted, there are a couple things that are still falling into place that aren't completely certain at this point, but that's the reality of where we're at. And we have to budget before there's total certainty. So
We're very close, I'm confident.
A quick question. You mentioned we have 3 less pieces of equipment worth approximately $2 million. Is that what I heard?
It's more than $2 million, yeah.
we will by the end of next year. We don't now.
And so we're selling that, and how do the funds flow from that?
That is an excellent question, which will be decided in 2023 by the SOFD board.
Okay.
There was some of that contemplated in the IGA.
So there isn't a reconciliation that will occur with everything, with all of our contributions.
Correct. Alderman Bryan.
Was there any, it's a little bit off this budget, but is there any discussion about next year when we don't have the ARPA funds, or
We have them next year again.
we have them next year too?
So
Yeah.
we have it for 30 months.
Well,
And the way it works is in the last 6 months of that, we're going to remove one of our, what we call the POP position, a paid on premise paramedic, and that's a huge savings that'll go for absorb almost 2/3 of the cost of that ARPA. And again, if you remember back to our original meetings in here back in April, we had something called Exhibit B. It was a spreadsheet that had a 5-year projection for what it was going to cost, and this whole thing is within a couple dollars of that Exhibit B that we looked at back in April. You have it?
we do.
Oh, that's the wrong one. My apologies. There are many versions of this. Well, he may be looking for that. If I could also, the other day I went down to visit the Kettle Moraine Fire Protection District. They just merged January 1 of 2022, and I was talking to the chief there about their merger, and I showed him our Exhibit B, and he said, you are way ahead of the game, because when they merged those communities, they did it much like we did out of necessity, but they made a budget for 1 year. So they got through this year, but they don't know what's going to happen next year. So he was actually quite pleased to see we had something like this, and wished that they had done it.
Back to the takeaways quickly. As we wrap up this portion of tonight's discussion, we will be adding 4 additional full-time firefighters and paramedics to the department on top of the 3 that were authorized this year, as well as another mid-year hire that Thiensville made, as well as a mid-year hire we were able to make due to some savings. So we're quickly adding full-time bodies to the department to the point where we are strengthening our emergency medical services division with the staffing necessary to fill ambulances and fill shifts. So, very encouraging outlook on behalf of the department both this year and into next year. On to emergency dispatch. Quickly, I mentioned this a little earlier. We're moving to the county on January 1st. And the communications budget, as I mentioned, is decreasing by about $300,000. We're planning to keep 3.5 of the 8.5 full-time equivalents that had previously been budgeted. Right now, the best we know is that Ozaukee County is seeking 4.5 full-time personnel to absorb Mequon's calls in their 2023 budget, and they're going through a similar process that we are right now here in October. As is the case with the fire department, our proposed levy is under review by the Department of Revenue, because in Wisconsin, if we eliminate a service, we have to have a corresponding adjustment or a decrease in our levy. And so the police chief has been working very closely with 3 representatives that we've been in touch with through DOR, and he has provided them all of the information, and we're hoping to have a determination from them here in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. And they are incentivized and motivated to get us a determination, because they know we need to set our levy by the beginning of November so that it can be adopted, and then tax bills can be generated from that. They understand the difficulty of not rendering a determination and having an inaccurate tax levy on behalf of which tax bills are then generated. So we do anticipate getting a determination from them soon. Pending that determination, there may be a slight modification to the levy, to the budget, or the full-time equivalents that we're able to budget for 2023. As the committee will recall, back in closed session in August, I believe, we talked with the members of the council about a staffing complement of 4.5 full-time equivalents, which would give us the ability to cover hours into the evening during the weekdays, and then also provide some weekend hour coverage for residents seeking assistance at the counter from the public safety. Our goal is still to staff at 4.5, but we're somewhat at the whim of the DOR right now as they work through their determination. So, to the extent that there are any changes to the emergency dispatch budget or the levy as it relates to the budget that will come before the council in November for adoption, we'll be letting you know as soon as possible so that you're armed and aware of those changes as they may occur. On to capital funding. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I did mention that capital is remaining level on a year-over-year basis between 2022 and 2023. The one change that we've made in working with the Director of Public Works is to swap out roadway lighting and to establish an IT computer replacement fund. Going forward, any lighting or roadway or signal expenses will be paid for out of the right-of-way assets account, which is funded mainly through debt financing, of which we issued $5 million in debt for roads earlier this year, and the road maintenance funding amount of $350,000 per year. So, on a 3-year basis, we've got maybe $6.5 million worth of money to put towards roads and the various appurtenances. And as we begin to knock off the parking lots across the city and repave those and improve those, Rotary Park, Library, City Hall, we may have some additional funds to address other right-of-way improvements, i.e. sidewalks, bike paths, other things that are in need of some maintenance as well. The Director of Public Works and I are going to be meeting here in the next couple of weeks to begin strategizing on how we can maybe move forward on that approach going forward. I also mentioned the ARPA funds, which have been baked into the capital plan that accompanies tonight's budget. We went through these numbers back in August at the budget workshop. We've also added in $20,000 for Festivals Electric, which is going to reduce our operating costs for running the Taste of Mequon and any other holiday events, such as the tree lighting that happen outside here in front of City Hall. So all of these numbers that were presented back at the workshop have been worked into the capital plan, as I mentioned, including $112,000 for the library. So these are all within the capital fund, and just as a reminder, once these move into the capital fund, these funds sit in the accounts that they've been dedicated to. And unlike the annual operating budget, which we approve here every year, these funds do not lapse. They stay in that account, and they're then available for spending when we need to make the expenditure. So, for example, Lemke Park Pavilion expansion, we're going to probably get an update on that project at the Committee of the Whole meeting next month. That $350,000 will be seed money for that project. And if and when construction occurs, whether that's in 2023 or 2024, that money remains available as a contribution towards completion of that project. Same thing for some of these other items. Now, the caveat, as we've discussed, is much of this money is ARPA money. So it's got to be programmed by the end of 2024 and then spent by the end of 2026. I don't foresee any problems with any of these projects and identified on this sheet in terms of getting spec'd and then spent within the next 4 years. This slide summarizes the recommended funding that I outlined in my memo to the council and that was sent out earlier this week. And this is really just a shorter version of the exhibits B, C, and D that were included in the budget document that was distributed early last week. And as was contained in my memo to the council, I am recommending that 4.5 cents be considered as an increase on the tax rate above the $3.02 that's currently contained within the budget. And I broke it across 5 categories, including fire, which would account for the $44,000 increase that was approved by the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Board, various costs related to governance and customer service that the city has either committed to or we will be spending in 2023, including a new prosecutor, an increase in the mayor's salary, membership, reinstatement of our membership in the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Alderman Meyer and former Mayor Worth spearheaded that. We got a free year of membership here in 2022, but now the bill has come due and we've got to pay that for 2023. We also have a small increase, equivalent to about 1% annualized in the city assessor's contract of $5,000. That's a number that'll stay constant over the next 3 years. And then we have some accreditation expenses that have now, we're now realizing as a result of earning that designation earlier this year. I am recommending that the council strongly consider an increase in the library's allocation commensurate with the request that was contained in Director Mushin Young's memo that was also included in the budget. As I mentioned, $4,000 is currently in the proposed budget, but the total request was for $45,000 plus. Historically, we have not provided a lot of additional funding to the library on a year-over-year basis. In fact, in 2015, their allocation was $1,048,000. This year's budget, 8 years later, is for $1,065,000. So over 8 years, they've seen a $16,000 increase in the money that the city has made available to them. On an annualized basis, that's equivalent to 0.2% per year. This increase would take that percentage, that annualized percentage, up by 0.5% to 0.7% on an annualized basis. So while this number may look big in 1 year, if you spread it out over the baseline since 2015, it's less than 1% annually for the library. So I would strongly urge the council to consider that as part of tonight's deliberations as we move forward. Utilities, we talked a little bit about this. I bundled these into electric and gas costs across both city facilities and our parks facilities. That's equivalent to about $58,000 or another penny or so on the tax rate. And lastly, we are in the final stages of completing the compensation analysis that was started earlier this year. And while we don't yet have the results of that, we're hoping to bring those forward next month at the committee of the whole meeting. It's likely that we're going to have some positions that show that they're below market and that they're going to require adjustment. I am requesting $50,000 to begin the process in 2023 of bringing up those positions that are most out of line with the market, so that we can begin to pay and ensure that our employees are earning a competitive wage relative to the other municipalities and the other local employers that we compete with for employees. And as some of you probably know from your own respective professions, it's a very competitive market right now for employees and finding good staff. And one of the biggest strengths we have in Mequon here is our ability to support good wages for our employees and to retain our employees long term across all of our departments: police, fire, public works, planning, finance, parks, clerks, you name it. And $50,000 is not going to probably handle all of the necessary adjustments, but not knowing where we are right now, it's a responsible number, and it's a conservative number. Other considerations that were also included in the materials that were sent out to the Common Council on Tuesday include a number of compulsory increases as well as expenditure reductions that I talked about a little earlier, that if the council is willing to add 6 cents to the tax rate and bring it from 302 back to 308, where we are now, these are what I would recommend as add-ins on top of what I showed on the previous slide.
Doesn't your recommendation slide bring us to 308?
It does.
So this would be on top of the 308 though?
No, I think the sum total of these two slides added to the 3.02 that's proposed brings us to 308, which would be stable levy, a stable mill rate, but it's increase in expenditures because we're taking into account the reduction mainly from the dispatch.
Correct.
So you're trading the cost of the dispatch for other areas where you're seeing increased costs.
Just as a way of comparing where Mequon is, I had Carrie and Nia pull together the area mill rates for all of the communities that we're comparing ourselves to as we go through this wage study. And we also added in Thiensville because we're now partners with them on fire and the library and other initiatives as well. And as you can see, Pewaukee is the one community, the one comparable community that is currently below Mequon in terms of the tax rate. All of the other communities, and many of these are household names here in Ozaukee County and throughout the Milwaukee metropolitan area, have tax rates that are considerably higher than Mequon. And the reason I'm sharing this with the council is not to say we need to get up to 603 like Grafton, but to put things in perspective. And if we consider 3, 5, 6 pennies on the tax rate, we're still going to be well below most all of these other brand name communities throughout the area. In terms of taxpayer impact, the mill rate, as I mentioned earlier, and the mayor just chimed in, is presently $3.08 per $1,000 of assessed value. With the consolidations, it's going to drop to $3.02. The tax levy, through the netting out of all these public safety consolidations, is only rising by $18,000. And the net impact is no increase in taxes paid to the city for an average taxpayer. Moving forward, we've got the sewer and the water budgets that'll be before the council on October 27th. We're expecting the sewer levy largely to remain stable. The budgets are still in development, so we don't have numbers for you now, but we're hoping to stay close to the current rate for the sewer utility. And as a reminder, 1 penny on the tax rate generates about $53,000 of additional revenue for the city. If we were to increase the tax rate by a penny on a $400,000 home, that's about a $4 increase in annual taxes. Looking ahead to 2023, and working with the mayor, the newly sworn-in mayor here over the last couple of months, we've had some discussions about how we may want to look differently at our budgeting process going forward. And I'm going to just throw this out for consideration here tonight. Just as we engaged in strategic planning earlier this year, we may want to think about, as a council and a staff, the thought or the notion of commencing our budgeting process earlier next year for 2024. And certainly that would make sense following the election of the new District 8 alderperson. I don't know that we'd want to get going well before that seat is filled, but we could use the committee of the whole format that we've adopted this year to engage in some budget-related policy discussions related to recommendations in the studies that we've done over the last couple of years, the master plans that have been developed, say for the parks, talk about impact fees and whether or not there's opportunities there, and long-range financial planning, both from an operations perspective as well as a debt financing perspective. Other goals would include updating the joint library funding agreement for 2023, completing another update, comprehensive update to the city's fee schedule going into the budget for 2024. As a member of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, their number one legislative priority is to reform how local governments are funded. State shared revenues have remained flat for the last 10 years, and we're not seeing any increases as are other municipalities throughout the state, and that puts more of a burden on the local tax levy in order to meet rising costs. So the League is organizing its members to engage in some discussions with lawmakers in Madison beginning next year as the next 2-year budgeting cycle kicks off, to see if there are opportunities for more revenue to flow back to the cities and the counties. And if you've been reading the newspapers and watching the news, the state's in a very, very strong position financially, to the tune of almost a $6 billion surplus. And a lot of that money is flowing from communities locally in terms of sales tax and other revenue sources. And I think the League is hopeful that we can have some fruitful discussions with our lawmakers to see if there's a more equitable funding arrangement going forward, which would certainly make some of these conversations here on an annual basis go a little more smooth. So there's an opportunity there. And then I mentioned debt planning. We delved into that just briefly last time at the budget workshop. We're going to continue to work with Ellers because we have capacity to consider our next facility project or projects. That's somewhat complicated by now our marriage with Thiensville on the fire and EMS side. So interesting discussions to come. So lastly, staff is recommending the budget that is before you this evening. It's considered to be fiscally responsible and accounts for all wage, insurance, and retirement increases, which are mandatory expenses by most measures. It limits the reductions in recurring expenses to about $100,000. And while we would rather not take those reductions compared to some previous years, we've limited the damage, and we've preserved the commensurate tax rate equivalent to $3.02 with the $3.08 that is currently in place. We're now at a point where the committee may wish to consider some adjustments, as I recommended in my correspondence to the council earlier this week. And there are other compulsory increases or spending restoration opportunities that were listed in Exhibits B, C, and D within the budget document. Also, supplemental requests from the Park and Open Space Board, as well as the library and city departments, are on the table as well for the committees. So, with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor, and certainly staff and the budget team are here to answer any questions. I know the fire chief took the lead on explaining the SOFD budget, but we've got the other department heads here, and they're available. Director Mushin Young is also here in attendance this evening, should there be any questions relative to the library. So, Mr. Mayor, back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Are there any questions on what's in the baseline budget? I'm not talking about the additive items we're discussing, but just start with the meat and potatoes first. I see Alderman Boucher has his hand up. Go ahead, Alderman Boucher.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak from afar. Just a simple question. Wilbur had mentioned the mill rate being staying the same. So if the mill rate were to stay the same, let's just say $3.08, we're looking at the impact on a $400,000 house. But with the increase in house evaluations or inflation on housing prices, would somebody see an impact if, let's say, their house is now, due to inflation next year, that across the board, do we give a bump to the housing values?
I'll answer it, and then someone can correct me if I say it wrong. We reassessed last year, and those assessed values aren't changing. So the answer is no. They'd see the same, if we kept it at 308, they'd see the same dollar value being paid to the city. The exception would be if someone took out a permit and closed a permit and did improvements and their value changed because of some work they did, but across the board that would not be the case.
Okay.
I hope I got that right. I'm getting nods of yes.
Correct. Or a home sale process would to potentially
That
drive
might trigger it, but
yeah.
not across the board. Alderman Meyer.
I'm not questioning total amounts. I'm questioning a little bit some of the approach in this. And what I mean is that, things that we already approved, like the mayoral salary increase, electric, gas, things like that, should have been already preset inside of the original budget. It shouldn't be a recommended addition to it, because that was approved. There were some other things inside here, but that should have been included in the original proposed budget, instead of that being separated out, now asking for it in addition to. So then that's my confidence on it. I mean, gas prices, electric prices, we all know that went up. We're going to be going up in that. So that should have been as part of the original budget set into it. So I'm not saying that it's not appropriate to have this. I'm just saying that that should have been in the original budget.
But I think the message I've been getting over the last couple of weeks is that to keep the expenditures flat, that wasn't possible. And that was the directive we gave at the budget pre-meeting about a month ago.
But we're really, we're not keeping we're reducing the mill rate. Well,
we're reducing the mill rate to account for services no longer being performed, which is consistent with what the DOR would have us.
But when we pass something like the increase for mayoral salary, that has to be baked in, because that was already approved by common council.
It was approved, but there was no funding for it.
That's why, correct, but that's why it goes inside of the budget proposal for the next year. Do that.
I think if we, I'm
not arguing against these things.
Yeah, I know, but I think
I'm just saying that some of these things should have been included inside of that.
Well, I think yes, they should in a perfect world, but we don't have the capacity to do it and keep things flat. It'd be a little more apparent if we weren't making a bunch of puts and takes on the public safety side this year. That kind of muddies the issue because we're reducing expenditures while other costs are going up. But that's...
Sometimes we talk a little differently inside of it. When we talk about we want to keep things flat, and I know that we're talking about budget and talking about that, but basically inside of the back of everybody's mind, at least in my mind, is the fact that what are we doing to keep it flat for the residents?
Sure.
What are we doing to do it that way instead of it going, okay, well, the city we're saving 6 cents per thousand, and that's a little bit of savings for the residents inside there. But in reality,
I think what staff brought us was
those expenses are still there. So,
I think what
and-
staff brought us was a budget for a flat dollar rate, the way the DOR would look at it, Department of Revenue, for puts and takes on what services we are or are not providing.
But
If you want a flat mill rate, then keep it at 308, and that it'll be totally flat year over year. We'll actually be able to do these things. We'll take care of some things that are long overdue and be set up better for years to come.
correct, when things like, you know, the electric and gas, which is included in some part of the budget, but these are not particularly included, so they're gonna have to be paid anyway.
Well, those are projected increases,
Correct.
and they don't actually include all the projected increases that were originally proposed.
But like I'm saying, at some point, you're gonna have to pay them. I mean, there's gonna be some increases.
I
so-
agree. Most of the stuff that's in, especially the 4.5 cent supplemental request, most of that we can't get out.
Already spent.
Yeah, you can't get out of it anyway, so it should have just been included inside of the budget, basically, but that's okay.
I had the same comment to Will, but I think he explained it to me. And it just,
As I mentioned in the materials that went out, and this may have been in the budget transmittal letter, the 4.5 cents, when compared to the tax rate, the proposed tax rate of $3.02, 4.5 cents is equivalent to a 1.5% increase on the tax rate. And I can tell you, the staff, the budget team have worked extraordinarily hard during these high inflationary times to absorb both increases that we are able to maybe manage, and then a lot of increases that we have no choice but to absorb. Whether it's insurance, whether it's retirement, whether it's electricity, contractual increases, collective bargaining. I mean, our hands are tied on a lot of these.
I'm not arguing against you at all, but
Okay.
you guys did a good job in doing that, you know, and I'm not arguing against these increases either inside of it. I'm just saying that, I've already said what I wanted to say inside of it, but, you know, it should have been in the original budget, even if it came in a little bit higher. You'd have to say, you could have just said to the common council, we really couldn't do that because there's gonna be the increases and stuff that we can't control. So,
Understood.
Alderman Guerrero was next.
So, when interest rates are low like they have been for the last 12 years or so, I mean extremely low, you've been able to get mortgages. I bought a house with a mortgage for 2.5%. You did over 30 years. Of course, you can buy a lot more you can pay a lot more for a house when interest rates are low because your mortgage is payments. So this inflationary boom that we had in the housing market, as interest rates start to rise, you're going to have a problem with property values starting to fall. People don't want to sell, they're going to sell their house, they don't want to sell their house, and then give up their 3 or 4% mortgage and buy a 7% mortgage. You're going to have to get compensated for that. Prices will fall when interest rates rise in the housing markets, just because you can't buy as much. You can't buy as much for the same dollars. And if we are headed into any type of recession, they continue to raise rates. What happens with the mill rate if somebody's house goes from $900,000 and 3 years from now it's worth $600,000? What happens to our revenue stream? How does that affect our budgeting process? Because you got to think about it as housing prices are extremely inflated. People were able to buy houses that they couldn't afford because they could afford it with the low mortgage rates, and that'll turn around. So how does that affect? How is that going to affect our revenues going forward? When we think about it, that could occur in our housing and all the assets that we based our mill rate on.
Well, I am not the city assessor, so I don't know that I'm the subject matter expert to answer your question completely. But I think on a year-over-year basis, property values will be subject to reassessment based on permit activity, based on home sales, and whatever we see in the market locally going forward. Now, there is a chance that real estate values will move the other way that they've been moving otherwise over the last number of years. But there are some schools of thought that there continues to remain a housing shortage, both here locally within the state of Wisconsin and across the country as a result of the last recession back in the late 2000s into early 2010, when the housing market dried up, and construction basically came to a halt. And I think there is some pent-up demand. Franklin just approved 1,000 apartments at their meeting earlier this week.
Saukville's got over 400 going in.
And so I don't know where the market's going to go, but if there is a cooling in the real estate market, my guess is that would probably be a multi-year lag that we would start to see, and maybe be able to be in a position to pivot and make some adjustments as necessary.
I think based off of when we did the reassessment and the revaluations, that actually missed a fair amount of the peak of the hysteria, and it didn't quite go as far. We're probably, if we compare them to property values now, we're still probably under by quite a bit versus what fair market sales were going for recently versus what they're assessed for. So we've got a little buffer in that before we get too out of whack. But say that scenario you described happened, but all it would do is, it's all dictated by the amount of money we spend. It's just an average, it's the amount of money going in and out, and the mill rate adjusts accordingly. So that it's not like we just adjust the mill rate, and the mill rate would go up, but the values would go down. Expenditures would stay essentially flat if we wanted it to, within reason. It's just that it's an outcome of the equation. Alderman Meyer.
I have a lot of faith in the Mequon market. I mean, even during 2007, 2008, 2009, maybe we'll verify that all over parish, but you know, why there was a lot of different parts of the country took a big bath inside of all their values inside of, but Mequon and surrounding areas in here held up pretty nicely during that whole period of time. Maybe not the business property, but you know, the residential properties held up pretty well during that time, and I can't really see a scenario like that. It could happen, but happening then again in such a relatively short period of time. So,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when, you know, we may have to make some adjustments because when your mortgage rate, you buy houses based on pretty much on what you can get on a mortgage rate. And when those go up, you can buy less of a house because your payments are more. So that's the only point.
If you go back to the slide with all the mill rates from surrounding areas, say you saw a catastrophic 20% destruction of property value, that's going to hit everyone. Everyone's mill rates are going to go up by 1/0.8 because the equalized value of everything's going to drop and everyone's expenses are going to be what they are. So it would just bring everyone up by whatever ratio there's destruction in property value that would hit everyone. Would be unique to us. I do agree with Alderman Meyer. We weathered the storm of 2008 and 2009 a little better than other areas, but I think, you know, Mequon set itself up uniquely to weather those storms. There's we haven't overbuilt like some communities have, or built as aggressive a rate. We remain attractive. Even in down times, we remain more attractive than others, and I think that's to our benefit.
And just to follow up on Mayor Durbin's point, this is the amount of money that we levy as a city on our tax-paying public. And so to the extent that there would be a downturn in the housing market, this is the number that we would have to manage, our tax levy, relative to any harm or decrease or increase in decrease in that homeowners would see in the value of their residences. If that makes sense.
We'll see how it works on. That's why I bring it up.
Well, when we reevaluated all the properties, the mill rate went way down. As a result, you know, some communities use it as an opportunity to sneak in a hidden tax increase. You know, we did the honest thing. It's really it's a byproduct of how much you spend and the equalized value of the community, and that determines the mill rate. But you know, communities I've lived in the past, I won't name them in an open meeting, would have used that opportunity to just slip in a quick tax increase across the board.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you.
Alderman Meyer.
Would it be appropriate at this point to make a motion to include the recommended administrative expenditures at this point?
It's always appropriate to make a motion.
I make that motion.
I'll second.
So what does that encompass? Is it
City administrators expenditure
I'm
adjustments.
encompassing the whole 4.52.
okay? So the recommended adjustments.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll take out the mayor's salary right now.
Now let's
Come out of the general fund and take it out because you have to pay it anyway. There's a motion for that.
Second.
There's a second. We'll continue debating. I think there's a lot of. I'm certainly supportive of the 4.5 cents. I think there is some wisdom in keeping the mill rate flat at 3.08 though, which would represent 6 cents or both slides that we're showing. 2022 has been an unprecedented year. We had 8.8% inflation in August. I checked the numbers. It's 10.9 at the end of September. It went up markedly. While projections for next year are certainly not that bad, people are projecting between 4 and 5%. There's a lot of uncertainty there as well. And recent moves by OPEC this last week give me some pause in the numbers in the fuel budget. Part of what's in the 1.48 cents is a lot of fuel costs for police, public works, and the like. Even with those expenditures in, it's not everything that was originally anticipated in the draft budget. Even if we included that, it's maybe 2/3 of it. And now OPEC's messing with rates again. I think the job market's going to continue to remain strong and competitive. Labor's in short supply. We have to be prepared for that going forward. We're in a transition year with respect to city services. We're shifting a lot over to SOFD, and while that budgeting process has been really solid and good, there are some unknowns with it, and the proof will be in the pudding after we get through a full year and see what it really is. We have a responsibility to prop that up and make it successful. And I think, unlike years past, we're not relying on fund balance this year. Structurally in the budget, that's good. If you look at the Exhibit D in the budget document for the expenditure cuts, a lot of those cuts are rather small and hidden in nooks and crannies in the budget. We haven't dug that deeply before. We're become accustomed to using that as our budget buffer. We plan on 180,000 of it, and maybe 150 of it go back at the end of the year. That buffer is essentially taken out of the budget. And on top of that, we've lost $70,000 in pilot revenue from previous years. So I would actually advocate for holding the mill rate at 3.08, so we're better prepared to weather the storm of next year. Especially if we get into a recessionary environment, and inflation doesn't ease off as much as people think it will. We'd be in a little bit of a world of hurt if we don't plan for that. And I appreciate the consideration of the budget holding the line at 3.02 to account for all those things. But I think we'd be wise to consider a mill rate of 3.08. It's holding the mill rate flat. Every resident will see the same dollars spent on their houses last year. And I think it'll set us up for years to come a little better if we're smart in how we act now. So I entertain more conversation on that proposal, or we have a motion and a second on the floor already. Alderman Parrish.
Yes, I have a few comments. I may want to even offer an amendment after hearing some reaction from my colleagues. Bear with me for a few minutes. I have some prepared remarks, so I'll be more concise. I appreciated Administrator Jones's presentation, which was excellent. as well as the whole budgeting process. I agree with you completely that the process needs to start earlier, especially for SOFD and the library, so that we have a better idea of everyone else's intentions, and appropriations could go much more smoothly as a result. This evening, my comments are focused on the parks and library as it relates to the budget processes and suggestions for how we might proceed. I am otherwise in agreement to all of Administrator Jones's recommendations, which lead to little or no increase in the levy. As it relates to the library, we have confirmed that our partners in Thiensville will not be doing any increase in library funding. In fact, they're going to hold steady at their $110,000 that they've also had for the past number of years. Even if we approve the $83,000 increase for 2023 over last year, the library is effectively in a proposed budget deficit of $30,000 now as proposed. It will now be forced to make cuts or use its savings based on the budget that we see in front of us. I'm trying to understand the equity of the Mequon-Thiensville library relationship, especially when I compare it to the Southern Ozaki Fire Department relationship. That one is collaborative and creative, whereas the library relationship may be in need of some modifications. Because our partners were not able to, Mequon has covered a lot of recent expenses in the spirit of this partnership. We have paid for the library compensation study, legal fees for the Southern Ozaki Fire Department. We're proposing $150,000 in ARPA dollars. They're proposing none. And now there is a growing funding disparity in these annual contributions. We are basically offering to cover more of the library obligation without any discussion with our other partners. Last year, Mequon paid 90.55% of the library costs, and the new imbalance puts us at 91.17% Mequon and only 8.8% Thiensville. That's down from their 9.45% contribution in 2022. Is this in accordance with our inter-party agreement? You could get back to us on that. Our partners are in a tough spot with limited revenue growth, but their 2023 proposed budget as of October 3rd online shows that homeowner taxes in Thiensville are nearly unchanged for 2023. So I just want to make sure that our residents are making comparable sacrifices to our partners in the adjoining community. In general, I am okay with the higher level of increase for library funding on an annual basis. However, I am debating an increase of $60,000 in operating funds versus the $83,000 proposed. And I'll explain why. ARPA funding is so critical for the library and parks, and this Common Council leadership has a unique opportunity to deploy these funds wisely. While the library could certainly use all $150,000 in ARPA funds we initially proposed, I am not sure it is mission critical at this point. Currently, I'm aware they have excellent plans for new collection spaces and RFID-enabled security gates. There's no ARPA dollar contributions coming from Thiensville, and it is quite possible we will need $50,000 of this ARPA money for other critical projects in our parks, such as filling gaps with Lemke. We did not, with the Lemke proposed project, which I'll touch on quickly. We did not forecast the failure of our fishing pier at Rotary this past year, and that ate up all of the funds this past year. So they got nothing accomplished otherwise. They just kind of tried to keep them going in our parks. Therefore, I'm suggesting we offer a range of $75,000 to $125,000 of ARPA funding to the library, with a further review of our goals in accordance with the strategic plan, and leaving us some flexibility for the parks. This all ties into our underinvestment in the parks. For 2023, we are awarding only a 1.87% increase in operating funds to $602,000. In 2020, it was $650,000. So I am considering a proposal. How do we get another $25,000 over to the parks? And partly I'm either looking at a portion of what we're offering to increase for the library, or we can contemplate a half-cent increase over what we're already talking about. Parks has consistently demonstrated its value to our residents, and I assure you we are not keeping up with the needed infrastructure investment, which will cost us more in the long run. I hope you took a moment to read the Parks Board memo, which was, the Parks Board has spent months on that memo. So I realize you just got it yesterday, but they've spent months like debating every word in there and what they're going to propose. They are really fine-tuned their focus. The chair of the Parks Board is here tonight if you have any questions, as are a bunch of the library board volunteers if you have any questions of them. The parks really need playground and infrastructure updates like water and internet. We need to start making an effort to accomplish these goals. That's not being done in this budget. Once we shift our spending focus to the civic campus and the EMS facilities very soon, it'll be very hard to come up with new funding for parks. So that is why I'm now thinking it is time to make some progress, maybe with a half-cent increase in the levy or otherwise perhaps not giving the library as much. Either way, going with the $3.08 levy. If you don't want a half-cent levy increase, then I believe it should come out of, unfortunately, temporarily out of the library's $82,000 increase over 2022. After hearing comments from my colleagues, I would make some amendments to that effect. And then to conclude, we really need to revisit the Mequon-Thiensville library agreement internally, perhaps at a finance committee and the legal review. We need to determine where we stand with this agreement and if there are any changes we would like to propose to our municipal partners, and maybe there won't be, over the upcoming year. And it should really be modeled after the Southern Ozaki Fire Department, which is a really creative, collaborative partnership where everyone wants it to succeed. We are in this together, and an open and honest conversation with all our stakeholders would benefit everyone. Thank you.
Hold on a sec. I think to some degree we need to separate the ARPA discussion from the budget because that's really outside.
I found that very difficult.
It's outside the budget process. Might add we didn't pay for their staffing study. The contractor provided it for free within our. We charged us an amount and they did the library for free. But I think some of those points are valid with park funding. I think taking a little longer view than just next year. I think we're in a position to perhaps close TIF 3 early. That wouldn't be for a couple more years beyond that. But that'll really open up some room to do some of those more aspirational things. Right now we're fairly constrained. We kind of let off with that on the second slide. There's only $600-some thousand of levy capacity before we need to go to a referendum. So that's just under 13 cents. We're contemplating maybe using 6 cents of the 13 cents tonight. But the difference between those two is the limit we could ever hope to increase it before we have to do a referendum. It's not a lot of money. It's maybe $350,000 extra on an annual basis. So it's important to keep that in the back of our minds as we try to move all the chess pieces on the budget board, not just this year, but 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So I think we should start having some of those conversations and planning for that. That would be something I want to have more discussion on is how do we maybe close TIF 3 sooner? Now that it's in the black, it's generating its own increment. It's going to talk about closing it early to start doing some of those things.
I don't know if just respectfully, I don't know if I followed that in terms of, so why are we trying to catch up the library 100% when we have
We're
a clear
not even close to
underinvestment?
catching up the library 100%. We're only proposing a $40,000 or $44,000 increase.
That's the way it's worded in the packet. It's really an $82,000 increase over what we gave last year. So it's a lot more money than that, plus the ARPA. So I'm just asking.
I'm not following it. No.
Yeah, could you explain that? Because I don't
We
understand
gave
that.
$1,061,000 in 2022, and then it's a matter of what we're going to give this year.
There's 4,000 baked in the baseline budget and another 41 in the additive item.
The 4,000.
It's 45. It's 45,000 more.
What are you proposing to give to the library? I'm looking at the library's budget, and it says.
The library's budget is not. Their budget request document is not our budget.
I get that. So what are we giving to the library this year? As far as what are you proposing under Will's? The total amount we're giving.
There's
Including Wills?
Yeah, just like a one
Right.
clear number. Like, what are we giving?
45, I think, is the number.
Increase.
And I'm
45.
just, my question was really just like, what's the total we're giving?
45.
Oh, 1,065,000 is what's in the budget.
But if we go
Then
with
if we
Will's,
go
then we add the
with
42.
additional 41,000 on top of that.
On packet, page 199, in the middle of the page, Director Lucian Young requests $45,716. That is the number requested by the library.
But then you add your number in.
4,000 of that is already in the budget due to the 3-year averaging formula that we have to abide by. And then the additional 41,000 to meet that funding request amount is part of the 4.5 cent spreadsheet that was up on the screen earlier. So 45,000 is the amount that's proposed for the library.
That's including yours.
Sorry?
It's including your recommendation.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's just maybe the way it was presented with these, kind of what Alderman Meyer was saying. We're like doing like overages over baselines, and I'm just trying to figure out what the number was. So now it's clear. I do feel that's much better. And again, a lot of my reaction is a result of learning that Deansville is doing no increase. So
Can I speak to
I'm
that?
all about this.
Alderwoman Schneider.
I'm under the impression, and I think that Ms. Munch-Young could help me with this, but it's partly related on population, but it's also partly related on circulation. They have other metrics that they use to determine who pays how much money. So
It's true. That's the original IGA. But I don't think either of us are budgeting based off that, because since that original intergovernmental agreement, the state passed that maintenance of effort, and I think we're both following that now. We're both paying that amount, and it's all less. We both collectively abandoned IGA. It still is in place, but there's a superseding state
Here
law.
we're stepping up. We're making our contribution.
Well,
That's my
yeah,
point.
I think, and it's
So,
we should. They're just
Good.
like us. They're roughly 3/4 staff cost driven. We're roughly 3/4 staff cost driven. They need to pay their people cost of living increases, or they're going to seek employment elsewhere, and we're going to fall behind others. It's a start. It's been flat for a long time, and they've been able to roll with the punches, but they're kind of out of gas. We need to help them out. Alderman Meyer.
So how much is not being funded from the park requests?
We have that document we can put up, or we just refer to it all in our.
I don't. In terms of understanding your question, Alderman Meyer, are you referring to the park requests received yesterday?
What I'm referring to is that the original request from the department head for parks. And
The
then,
original request from the department heads?
correct, and then the amount that we're gonna be funding, the amount that we're proposing to fund.
Staff report for planning and improvements was 340,000.
pardon?
How much is it?
I can turn.
What Director Lundin said was there was a request for parks improvements in the capital plan equivalent to $340,000 for next year. The amount of ARPA money that's been allocated to the capital plan is $350,000.
So we're above.
Yes.
Okay.
And the $350,000 is apart from the $50,000 worth of capital funding that the parks
Always good.
normally sees on a year-over-year basis. So in effect, going into next year, while the request was 340, the amount is 400.
If I may, I feel like my role is to speak on behalf of the Parks Board. So that they put a lot of time into this memo. They've narrowed their list of 20 things into 5 things that they want us to work towards. if you look at more than half of what they're requesting is Lemke. So I think they're looking for some messaging from us that we're on board with Lemke, and I haven't heard anyone. We're going to have a presentation next month on that or soon, and that will be a good use of the funds. But when you really dive into this list, there's 4 other really major expenditures that there's no source of funds for. So the Parks Board is trying to say, we'd like you to start making some deposits for these inevitable expenses, especially before you turn your attention towards Civic Campus. So, I mean, the playgrounds will either get removed, or we're going to have to fundraise, or we're going to have to give the money. And same thing as water and infrastructure at the parks. It's all outdated, and they're almost spending more money to maintain it. The Lemke Park Pavilion we touched on, and then the pickleball basketball court at Rotary. So that court is done. So they have limited funds, and they have to choose, and they have no way to accomplish these things. So that's where I was saying, well, if we could have a slight bump in the annual capital contribution, they could start making, just like I heard him say tonight, a 7-year plan for how we're actually going to accomplish these things. But it won't get accomplished based on the current funding levels, because, for example, it all went to the fishing pier last year. So that's my point. We have more than one entity that needs some extra funds. It seems like we have an opportunity to do that without increasing taxes as well. So I find that very attractive.
So this is more, I'm just trying, we've had limited time to absorb it because we got it yesterday.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
trying to do my plug for the board.
That's all well and good. We're just trying to absorb it right at the end of the process, which is part of the impetus that the conversation I had with Administrator Jones about starting to get ahead of this earlier in the year next year, so that we don't have surprises late in the process. But I think if I look at some of these projects on here, they're probably all very well thought out and needed. Not arguing with the need for them. This is presented like a 2023 plan. It's really, sounds like it's more of a longer range plan, so we can phase it in over time.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, so it provides a little context. I think there's some opportunity to consider things like that moving forward.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of why we wanted to do a little bit more talk about budgeting in Q1 and Q2, because how it's gone the whole 10 years I've been involved in city government. Yeah, get to August, time to throw the budget together, and everyone scrambles for 2 months, and we get a document, and then a lot of big decisions are made rather quickly, and that's not always the best way to do it. So I appreciate the memo. I think we really, when we do it in Q1 next year, we'll be talking about this in a little more depth. It's hard to absorb the last minute appropriations committee time. But Lemke, we are committed to Lemke. How we pay for the rest of it will need to be debated, and it feeds into long-term debt financing discussions, or where we see capacity in the budget opening up in the coming years. That's more of that longer range forecasting discussion. When does that puzzle piece fit into the puzzle? It's not just doesn't fit into the puzzle, it's also when. We do budgeting exercises like that, we see windows opening up. I think it's good. I'm glad we have this. It may take a couple of years to work all of it into the plan, though. Alderman Meyer.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think it's a great memo inside there. I think what we need to do is, it wouldn't give it as much attention as it needed if we try to shoot from the hip tonight. And I would recommend that we do have a committee of the whole meeting that is specifically set up for that, sooner than later, as soon as we can fit it in, so that we can start taking a look at some of these on priority wise and see if everybody is on board to fund all those. That's the question too. So we shouldn't have, the park board working on stuff that maybe some people aren't willing to fund.
Exactly.
So
they're wasting
wasting a lot of time in doing that. I'm not saying they're not that they're not a beneficial thing, and that we don't need them, but maybe some people aren't willing to fund those and want to see more of maybe a private entity come in and help that instead of, or public-private entity and do that instead of just us funding it. So, but I think it really does deserve a committee of the whole meeting. Give it done.
Before I forget, I saw Alderman Boucher wave his hand. So, Glenn, you're up.
Thank you. I'm definitely in agreement with what Alderman Penn had to say, and I also I have a question and then a comment. The mayor mentioned that we're looking in a couple of years potentially of TID 3 being closed and having those available. I'm wondering if with some of our items here, if we're putting things in too early that we're going to end up paying for now, that might be better to wait until some of those, or at least work our way up instead of going a full amount like Alderman Harris was saying. But I would like to add a comment overall regarding the entire packet that we have, or the budget. And that is, overall, once again, it's an excellent document, and I appreciate all the efforts that don't even know that going into this. And with such a massive undertaking, it's hard to come down to, I think, top priorities. And to me, the key priorities are, as always, fire, EMS, and police, as far as safety of Mequon and its residents are concerned, and the businesses. The second is we have a great workforce that works together to achieve some incredible results for everyone in Mequon. And it's more, instead of running a business as a city, it's more like running a conglomerate of businesses. And I think our biggest assets, as Will mentioned, are the people. And so when I look at the budget, I think that that $50,000 is only a start as far as what we look at with that increase that we're seeing across the board, and we want to retain all the good employees that we can. And so regarding this, at the same time, residents are feeling hit when it comes to fuel, groceries, just everything across the board. And so I think we need to be working as hard as we can to be down to that 302 level. I know it's not going to quite happen, but we need to be also keeping in mind what everyone's going through right now as well.
Thank you. Alderman Hancher.
I just want to say I'm in full support of the budget and also the adjustments that Administrator Jones had presented and the Finance Director presented. It needs to be accepted. And especially the library, I don't know, I have a problem with, let's take money out of one to give to another. The budget that they proposed here with the adjustments, I think it's a fair assessment of what needs to happen. The library's been, for years and years and years, have been shortchanged in the amount of money that they've been receiving, and it becomes more and more difficult. And going back to what Alderman Bushy said about expenses, the library is the one organization, the one facility where people can go and enjoy themselves, educate themselves, and for free, in the sense. Obviously, taxpayer money is doing that, but I can go into a library, I can get a movie, I can get books, I can see programs. Like if you have young children, there's programs for all basically free. So when you're talking about the constraints of inflation, yeah, it's real. But the library itself is something that people gravitate to because of that. They can do something that is educational, fun, exciting. If you ever go in the summertime watching the presentations outside, or you go to presentations for about society, it's all there. And it's a place where it spans all the ages, from the youngest to the oldest, that they can go and get the information that they need, whatever it is. So I'm in full support of this budget. And thank you for adding that specifically for the library, because I'm on the library board. So I am definitely biased about it. And we definitely do need it, because after years and years of being, not being raised, I think this would satisfy the needs at this time for the library. Thank you.
Alderman Carroll. We just did the parking lot over there, right? We just redid the parking lot. Cost was $159,000.
Yes.
Plus lighting. Lighting wasn't included in that, right?
Lighting will be another 20,000 or so.
Did Deansville kick in anything for that?
The parking lot is located in Mequon proper. It is our property. And it serves not only the library, but it serves Reneke Field as well as the swimming pool. So it's and the playground lot over there as well. So it's a multi-purpose lot. We don't consider it the library parking lot.
Okay, so there's multiple uses, but
Yes.
swimming's 6 months or 3 months out of the year, and some of the other ones are 3 months.
Correct.
Most, but that's fine. You know, last time around we talked about this, and we said, all right, and there was a sort of a presentation given, and I brought up that, you know, I thought some of the expenses were really high that the library had on there. I mean, I just, you know, I worked as a janitor in college. I worked as a janitor. I know how much it, you know, I owned 2 businesses and I had janitorial services, and I looked at it and we talked about maybe some type of a way where we could work with the library and share services and reduce expenses on that side. I think that there's plenty of room to reduce expenses. I mean, I looked at that. It said on there that the janitorial services were 6 days a week. 6 days a week. That's a lot of. You know, you could get by on probably cleaning the bathroom 6 days a week, but cleaning in the library doesn't. I don't know how dirty a place can get. I mean, somebody comes in, reads a book. I mean, it's pretty clean. I mean, you could go through and find expenses in that. And I own 2 businesses, and I looked at both sides of the equation all the time. The revenues. Here, revenues is just raising taxes. There, I had to get new clients and service them. And then on the other side, I would always look at the expenses. And at the last meeting, we talked about doing something along that, but I heard nothing about that tonight. All I saw was that we're adding more money, and with no oversight. So weren't you going to do something about the working with them on a joint thing, share some services? That was at our last meeting.
Well, I don't know that it was at the last meeting. That was just 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago in August. But truthfully, and I think this was acknowledged at the last workshop meeting, there was some discussion about working with the library this year on collaborative efforts and looking at the joint funding agreement. That was a year ago, back in October. Thereafter, the council approved a memorandum of understanding with Deansville to pursue a joint fire EMS department in December. That effort kicked up full speed in January, and it's been 0 to 60 since then, in order to combine the 2 departments so that we can fit it into this year's budget. And then mid-year, on top of that, we came to the realization that we needed to move dispatch services up to Ozaukee County. So in terms of a degree of difficulty, this budget has been extraordinarily difficult, and frankly, it's not even done yet. And I just don't know if there was the available time to pursue something that was otherwise talked about a year ago, before this council and this city made other, frankly, significant commitments.
Well, I'd like to see them look at going forward. If you're going to kick in this amount of money every year, and Deansville's not kicking in their share, I think maybe we can look at helping out for the money that we're spending, see if we can be just as more efficient. When you're more efficient, you save money and you get better services.
And I would agree with you, and it's on the list, the to-do list for 2023, update the joint library funding agreement. I would anticipate, as part of those discussions, we would also look at, much like we did with the Southern Ozaukee Fire Department, ways in which we can work together and collaborate, possibly more efficiently.
Okay. Yeah, we sat here almost a year ago to the day and had that conversation, and
Yeah.
then
Didn't happen.
it didn't happen because
Somebody else.
we had bigger fish to fry. Sorry, library. You know, our fire department was kind of in need of a lot of help. So here we are a year later, and we're having the same conversation. But it is, you know, I'll take the brunt for that one. I know Will would have loved to get more sleep this last year for all the effort he and other staff members put into SOFD. I mean, it's been an extraordinary lift. And, you know, we have a board and we all sit on it, but staff does 99.9% of the work. We get a good packet, and we get to vote on things, but they've done the work. And there hasn't been available time to do that. Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. And I heard everything my colleague said. Just to kind of update my comments from earlier, based on my understanding of the facts now, I'm in favor of what is being proposed for the library and others per Administrator Jones's recommendations. It is my intent to vote in favor of it, as long as it kind of holds that line at 308. I feel like the point was made about parks, and I really, really appreciate, as does the Parks Board, my colleagues listening to what I'm saying. Their memo includes a more narrowed down list of what they're looking to accomplish, and they are looking for some direction and commitment from us over the coming years. So we're stepping up for the library, which is absolutely needed, and I hope we can kind of address their needs next year once they get us some updated, maybe more concise information with kind of a 5-year plan, so to speak, of how an increase would be deployed. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I think my guidance would be focus on the one that's ARPA funded, because those funds have a timeline on them, so we have to get it planned and allocated in the next couple of years and get it built in a couple more. Start there and we'll expand out from there. We need a general guideline. Alderman Carroll.
My prediction is if you do jointly and look for ways to save money with the library and to increase efficiency with the library, that you could probably save some money. We can put that toward the parks, which is sorely needed going forward. So I'm going to vote for this tonight, but if I don't see some type of work on this over the next year, I'm not going to vote for it ever again, because I know there's cost savings that can be had there, and I know that efficiencies make it not only cost savings, it's better service, everything improves, and that money could be used and then used for our parks, which are sorely needed.
So we have a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a second on something that would result in a 3.065 mill rate, and maybe the makings of a motion for 3.08, which would be inclusive of both packages that the administrator presented. There's no one.
What's a 3.65?
There's the two spreadsheets. The motion was just for the first
section,
not the second.
Will's recommendations get us to 3.08, correct?
No, it's his.
Yes, there's two separate.
If you include both packages, I think the first motion was
for the first section.
The first one, which added the 4.5 cents to the 302.
So our property tax is going up to serve any of my residents.
If you vote for 308, they'll pay the exact same amount they did last year, unless their house happened to go up because of one of those things we talked about before. But it won't go up. It'll be flat. This is kind of a rare year where we can technically raise revenue without raising the mill rate because of some of the things that have happened. The DOR looks at it a little different than we do. I think we think mill rate. The DOR would say that our levy capacity should go down because of what we did with dispatch. We have levy capacity, so we're trading that cost for other costs, essentially, but we have a flat tax rate of 308. We voted for 308. It's a unique opportunity to get a little bit more done and do some things we haven't been able to do, but hold the levy, or the tax rate, sorry, not the levy, the tax rate, the mill rate flat. Alderman Meyer.
So, I will not accept the 3.08 as a friendly amendment to it. So we'd still have the original amendment on the board unless there was somebody who wants to make.
We can vote on that part separately, I think.
Also moved.
It's,
I think
it's there.
so. We had a motion and a second on
Accepting the 4.52
4.52.
in addition to the 3.02.
and you wouldn't accept it as a friendly amendment. So we need another amendment or a motion for an amendment.
Well, we can just vote on the first. We've got a motion, so we can just vote.
Well, we could vote on that, and then someone could
Someone
make a
wants to
motion
make
to
a-
approve the other one.
All right.
Okay. Let's do that, and we'll get partway down the road. So the motion on the floor is to accept the items on the slide under recommended funding totaling 4.52 cents per thousand.
Which gets you to 3.065.
3.0652, correct. So
That would be a tax reduction.
that would be a tax reduction, just so everyone's clear on the,
I'm gonna chime in. Because
using the mill rate.
I did offer a caveat under the emergency dispatch slide. You know, pending the determination by DOR, there may be a slight adjustment upwards or downwards in the levy for dispatch moving to the county. Now, the county is likely going to be adding positions, and we don't know at this point what effect that's going to have on their tax rate and their levy. But we conservatively budgeted in such a way that even a 6-cent increase on the tax rate, there's a likelihood that it will be negligible. But it could result in a slight increase in a homeowner's taxes. We don't know. 302 is the very conservative number. Just offering that up.
Well, if my assessed value stayed the same, and the rate were 308, they'd be the exact same tax bill I paid last year.
Okay.
It would be. I think that's how it works. It'd be the exact same dollar value paid. The finance director
That works.
nodding up and down. Yeah. Now, if I added a $100,000 wing on my house, my value would go up $100,000, and I'd pay the taxes on that at the same rate, so it would go up. The mill rate, 308 being flat, would be a flat, appear to be flat to the person opening up their tax bill in early December. That's the way
That's what it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Call the question.
You want an amendment now? Or a proposed amendment, or do you
I thought we were voting on.
I think
On
we're going
this.
to vote on the first one. We have an amendment on the second package, or another vote on another package.
So what are we voting on, 306 or?
I think we're voting on what would
We're voting on
would
306.
total, yeah, 3.0652. So well, we have to call it. Let's call the roll.
Okay. Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
Aye.
Alderwoman Schneider.
Aye.
Do you vote Mayor Nurbin?
I do now, yeah.
Okay.
Aye. In November, maybe. Okay, so that much is resolved. Now, I think Alderman Parrish might want to make another motion.
So what would it be for another?
So you wanted
For that?
Yeah, for
for the second one.
1.48 cents, totaling an even 6 cents between the two. For a final value of 3.08, which is the same mill rate as last year.
Okay, so moved for the additional $1.48 as shown.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Alderman Meyer.
The reason why I didn't include that as a friendly amendment is because of the fact that there are no, while there's probably, you can always use extra money, there is no designation for those funds, and we're just taxing to tax on that, and for possibly use it in the future.
Well,
So that's the reason beforehand, Mayor, what you said that, well, we'll tax that amount and, because we know we're gonna need that moving forward. I mean, to me, that's just taxing people to.
These are required.
No, these are, look at what's on the list though. The first one is our website. We don't have a website if we don't pass it, or we gotta carve it out somewhere else. Then there's the fuel cost adjustments for public works and police.
This is your point of like, why wasn't it in the budget to begin with? Then we
Right.
wouldn't be voting on this right now. So we need this stuff.
For pool supplies, we actually, I think, needed that last year. We had actually quite a few pool users last year, more than typical, because we remained open because we were smart about how we hired lifeguards.
And if I may, Mayor, there's a lot of items that even after this list will remain on the cutting room floor.
No, I understand that, Will. I mean, I appreciate that. It's the same way as showing up saying, hey, we're so low on the taxes, that's the reason why in our mill rate, and that's a good justification. And it's not. It's a good example up there, but it's not.
Understood. But this is not sexy stuff. This is real meat and potatoes. Keep the lights on, keep the operations going, street lights, fuel for our squad cars, our snow plows. We rebid the copier contract and we saved a lot of money, but we now have a cost for copier paper that was mentioned a couple of months ago here in this room during the approval. And then we've got some supplies, forestry. We've got some highway division overtime that we'd like to keep in the budget because you never know what kind of snow season you're going to get.
Well, I understand all that stuff. So,
Yeah, I'm just kind of walking.
You know, I see it in front of me. You know, it's the point of the matter still, like I said before, this stuff should have been included if it's going to do the inside of it. Fuel costs. I mean, that should have been it.
Even if we pass this and we add the energy related items here to the other one, it's still probably only about 2/3 of what the projections were.
But we're still holding back
We can
60,000 from.
we can pay the extra if it happens out of general fund. Well, that's where it will come from if we don't budget for it. But we're not using general fund anywhere else in the budget. So.
Yeah, but we're still holding $60,000 we're still holding out from ARPA for next year? In your last presentation, was it 60 or was it 80? I can't remember exactly, but you're still
Yeah, it's
holding
about
out.
half what we did the previous year because we're trying to wean ourselves off of that because if we just keep it flat, we'll get to year 3, it'll be a budget cliff. But we'll fall off and then we'll wonder where that $200,000 of ARPA money is and it's gone.
It's going to happen that way anyway.
It's gonna
Hit us
It's
eventually.
going to happen that way anyway.
trying to come down easy off that euphoria.
$60,000 doesn't do a lot, so.
We have a motion and a second for the final 1.48 cents. Any further comments, questions? Alderman Boucher?
Thank you. Just want to follow up, I don't see a way not to vote in favor of this. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but just a caution is that something I think I said a few years ago is that governments, how do we ever see them lower taxes? And here I want to make sure that we don't get the impression that we just said, oh, 308 is something everyone's comfortable with, that at the beginning of the budget plan with rules adjustments, I think it's important to highlight that this was actually a much higher proposal that was pared down to something that was more palatable to what residents would end up feeling. I don't know if I stated that quite right, but I just want to make sure that we're not looking at it that we're trying to fill a bucket, but instead we're trying to empty it as much as possible.
Of all the supplemental requests in the original budget, and still there's an equivalent of 4 cents per thousand that have hit the cutting room floor. And I'm sure preliminary versions of the budget might have even included more. Now, there's all sorts of requests that we didn't even get to see because the process of assembling that final package, I'm sure. I'm seeing some nods. Staff did work really hard to get the numbers down, and I can't thank them enough for the work they put into it. I know it's been an abnormally difficult year, lots of moving pieces, way more than normal.
That completely understood. I just want to make sure that that gets emphasized, that it was pared down quite a bit.
Noted. I think we can put that in the popular version of the budget report for next year, for which we'll surely receive another award like we do every year. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the final 1.48 cents? If not, call the roll on that.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
Aye.
Alderwoman Schneider,
Aye.
Mayor Norman.
Aye. Is there any other topics people would like to talk about that we didn't cover already? I think we've hit high points. Someone could always make a motion to add something else, but I don't have the sense we're there. Not?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a, yeah, is
Second.
there a favorite motion Alderman Garrell would like to make?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
I agree. I like it.